The first thing I noticed when I walked into the ballroom that night was the chandelier. My late wife Eleanor would have hated it. She used to say crystal chandeliers were what people bought when they wanted to look rich instead of being rich. She would have laughed quietly into my shoulder and whispered something cutting, and I would have squeezed her hand, and we would have moved on. But Eleanor had been gone 4 years by then, and I was standing alone under that ridiculous chandelier at my only son's wedding, holding a champagne flute I did not want, watching $300,000 of my money pretend to be elegance. My name is Sterling Aldrich. I am 68 years old. I built a regional logistics company from one warehouse in Akron in 1987 to 41 distribution centers across 6 states. I sold the controlling interest 2 years ago for more money than my father, a Pennsylvania steelworker, ever imagined existed in the world. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you because what happened that night happened to a man who had earned every single thing in his name, and that matters for what comes after. My son's name is Royston. He is 31. He was a quiet, careful boy. He used to follow Eleanor around the kitchen with a wooden spoon when he was 3, pretending to cook. He cried when his goldfish died. He read books about astronauts. I do not say this because it is relevant to the wedding. I say it because I want you to understand that the boy I am about to describe is not the boy I raised. Somewhere between Dartmouth and the marketing firm in Manhattan and the woman he met at a rooftop bar in Tribeca, my son became a stranger wearing my son's face. The woman's name was Adeline. I will not pretend I liked her. From the first dinner at the steakhouse on 54th Street, when she ordered the most expensive bottle on the list without looking at me, I understood. I have been in business too long not to recognize a calculation when I see one, but Royston loved her, or believed he did, and I had promised Eleanor on her last clear afternoon that I would not become the kind of father who chased his son away. So I paid. I paid for the engagement party at the rooftop in Tribeca. I paid for the rehearsal dinner at the Italian place she chose because someone famous had been photographed there. I paid for her parents' suite at the plaza because she mentioned, casually over coffee, that they had never stayed somewhere quite that nice. I paid for her dress, her mother's dress, the bridesmaid's shoes, the string quartet, the harpist, the second harpist, because the first harpist apparently had the wrong energy. When Royston came to me 3 months before the wedding and asked if I would help with a few additional expenses, I said yes before he finished the sentence. I told myself I was buying my son's happiness. I see now I was buying his contempt. The ceremony itself I barely remember. I remember her father walking her down the aisle. I remember thinking he looked smug, like a man delivering a winning lottery ticket. I remember Royston crying when she reached him. And I remember being moved despite everything, because he was still my boy somewhere in there. I remember the priest saying the words. I remember Eleanor's empty seat in the front row, the one I had insisted on, with the small framed photograph of her propped on the cushion. Adeline had asked if we could remove it. She said it was depressing. I said no. It was the only no I had given her in 18 months. I should have given her more. The reception was at a hotel ballroom in Westchester that her family preferred. 150 guests, mostly hers. I knew maybe 12 of them. My sister Bernadette had flown in from Phoenix. A few of my old colleagues. Eleanor's brother. The rest were strangers in tuxedos drinking my champagne. I had prepared a toast. I had written it on 3 index cards I kept folded in my jacket pocket. I had practiced it in the mirror at home for 2 weeks. It was not a long toast. I knew better than to give a long toast, but I had wanted to say something true about Royston, about the boy he had been, about Eleanor and how proud she would have been, about welcoming Adeline into our small family. I wanted to bless them. That was the word I had used in my head. I wanted to bless them. I never gave that toast. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she came to find me. I was standing by one of the tall windows looking out at the lights of the parking lot, just trying to breathe for a minute. The band was on a break. The room was loud with that particular reception. Loudness that gets inside your skull. She walked up beside me with a glass of champagne in her hand, and she did not smile. She said, "Sterling, I need to talk to you about something important." I said, "Of course." She said, "Royston and I have been talking, and we have decided that the apartment on Park Avenue makes more sense for us than for you. You are alone. We are starting our life. We need the space. We will need it more once we have children. So, we have decided that you should give us the keys tonight as a wedding gift. We thought it would be a nice gesture in front of our guests." I want you to understand the apartment she was describing. It was not just an apartment. It was the place Eleanor and I had bought together in 1996, when the company first cleared real money. It was where Eleanor died. It was where every photograph of our life together hung on the walls. It was where her clothes were still in her closet because I had not yet been able to make myself touch them. It was where I lived. It was where I would die, I had assumed in some quiet way, in the bed we had shared for 31 years. I looked at her. I did not yell. I have never been a man who yells. I said, "No, sweetheart. That is not going to happen. We can talk about helping you find something wonderful of your own, but that apartment is my home." She said, "You do not need it." I said, "It is not about needing it." She said, "You are being selfish." And before I understood what was happening, before my brain had even processed the movement of her arm, she had slapped me across the face. Hard, open palm, the kind of slap that makes a sound the whole room hears even over the noise. The ballroom went silent in pieces, the way silence travels through a crowd, table by table, conversation by conversation, until you could hear the clink of someone's spoon against a coffee cup at the back of the room. 150 faces turned toward us. My cheek was burning. My ear was ringing. I could taste blood from where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. Royston came running. I thought for one foolish second that he was coming to defend me. I thought he was going to take her by the elbow and walk her out of that room and apologize to me on his knees. I thought he was going to be my son. He was not coming to defend me. He was coming to defend her. He stood between us and put his hand on her back and looked at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. He said, "Dad, why do you have to make everything difficult? Why can you not just give her this one thing? It is just an apartment. It is just keys. Mom is gone. The apartment is too big for you. You are being stubborn. You are ruining her wedding day." I looked at my son. I looked at the woman who had just struck me. I looked at the silent room. I looked at the photograph of Eleanor I could see in my mind, the one on the empty chair. And I thought, "My love, you would never have allowed this." And then something inside me went very still and very cold. I did not say anything for a long moment. I took out a handkerchief and dabbed at my mouth, a streak in my jacket. I looked at Adeline and then at my son, and I said, "You were right. You were right that we should not do this here. Let me make a phone call. I will be back in 15 minutes. I walked out of the ballroom. I crossed the lobby. I went out the front doors of the hotel into the cold November air, and I stood on the curb, and I took out my phone, and I called the only person I knew would still be awake at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. Her name is Marguerite Donnelly Castellanos. She has been my attorney for 26 years. She is 61 years old, 5'2", weighs maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, and she is the most dangerous person I have ever known. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Marguerite, it is Sterling. I need you here in 20 minutes. She said, "Where is here?" I told her the hotel. She said, "What happened?" I said, "I will tell you when you arrive. Bring the binder." She knew which binder. She did not ask another question. She said, "I am leaving now. I should explain about the binder. 8 years ago, when I first started thinking seriously about estate planning, Marguerite and I had spent 6 months building what she called the contingency architecture. Every asset I owned was structured into trusts, holdings, and entities designed to be unwound, redirected, or revoked at my discretion. The Park Avenue apartment was held in a residential trust with revocation rights I controlled. Royston's allowance was a quarterly disbursement from a discretionary trust, not an entitlement. His position at my former company was a courtesy I had personally arranged with the new owners and could withdraw with one phone call. His credit cards were on my accounts. His apartment in the West Village was leased in my name. His car was leased in my name. He had grown up to be 31 years old without ever signing a single document for the life he was living. The binder contained the keys to all of it. I went back inside. I returned to the ballroom. I did not return to my table. I stood by the windows again. Royston came and tried to talk to me. I told him I was thinking, and I needed a few minutes. He went back to his bride. They thought, I believe, that I was working up the courage to apologize to her, that I would soon hand her the keys, kiss her cheek, and ask for forgiveness in front of everyone for embarrassing her. I let them think it. I watched the room for 14 minutes. At 10:23, the side door of the ballroom opened, and Marguerite walked in. She was wearing a black coat over what looked like the pajamas she had been reading in. She was carrying the binder. Her hair was tied back. She looked, to anyone who did not know her, like a small, tired, slightly disheveled grandmother. She crossed the ballroom in a straight line toward me, and I watched Adeline's face change as she registered the stranger walking toward her father-in-law with the leather binder in her hands. Marguerite stopped beside me. She said, "Who slapped you?" I said, "The bride," she said, "in front of all of these people." I said, "Yes." She said, "And your son?" I said, "My son told me I was being selfish." Marguerite was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sterling, I want to be very sure. Are you certain you want to do this tonight?" I said, "I have never been more certain of anything." She said, "Then we begin." What happened next took, by my watch, about an hour and 40 minutes, and it took place mostly with my voice never going above conversational volume. Marguerite sat down at an empty table near the window and opened the binder and began making phone calls. I sat beside her. The wedding continued around us. The band came back. People danced. Adeline watched us from across the room with growing unease. Royston came over twice, and twice I told him gently that I was conducting business, and he should attend to his guests. The second time he tried to look at the binder. Marguerite closed it with one hand, smiled at him, and said, "Royston, this does not concern you yet." The first call was to the property management company that handled the West Village apartment. Marguerite informed them that the lease, which was held in my name, would not be renewed at its expiration in 6 weeks, and that any further inquiries from the current occupant should be directed to her office. The second call was to the leasing company for Royston's car. The vehicle was to be collected from its parking garage on Monday morning. The third call was to the credit card companies. 3 cards, all canceled, effective immediately, with new cards in his name only to be issued at his own application. The fourth call was to the trustee of the Discretionary Education and Lifestyle Trust that had funded Royston's existence since he was 22. Marguerite, as co-trustee with discretionary authority, suspended all distributions pending a full review. The fifth call was the one I made myself. I called the CEO of the company I had founded, a man named Garrison Thorne, who had bought my controlling interest and kept Royston on as a courtesy to me. Garrison answered on the third ring. I apologized for calling on a Saturday night. I told him I needed to ask him a personal favor. I told him my son's employment at the company would no longer be continuing, and I asked if he would be willing to handle the separation cleanly and without drama. Garrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sterling, I have been waiting for this call for 2 years. I will take care of it on Monday." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I will be." The sixth call was to the manager of the building on Park Avenue, asking him to change the locks on my apartment first thing Sunday morning, and to add my niece, who lived in the city, to the approved visitor list, and to remove Royston and any associates of his. The seventh call was to my private banker, who confirmed that the joint account I had maintained with Royston for emergency purposes had a balance of $14,000 and would be closed within the hour, with the funds returned to my primary account. The eighth call was to the wedding venue. Marguerite identified herself as my counsel, confirmed that I was the contracting party for the reception, and instructed them that no further charges were to be authorized to my account. The open bar was to be closed at 11. The vendor invoices that had not yet been settled, which represented approximately $90,000 of remaining balance, were to be redirected to the bride and groom, whose contact information she provided. The ninth call was to the plaza, regarding Adeline's parents' suite. The reservation, which was on my card and prepaid through Tuesday, was modified to check out Sunday morning at 11. Any incidentals would not be honored. While all of this was happening, the wedding continued, unaware. Adeline had stopped watching us, perhaps deciding that whatever I was doing was not worth her attention on her wedding day. The dancing went on. The cake was cut. Royston gave a toast that I could not hear, because Marguerite was on the phone with my insurance company, removing him from the umbrella policy. I watched him laugh at his own joke. I watched her kiss him on the cheek. I watched the strangers applaud. At a few minutes before midnight, Marguerite closed the binder. She looked at me and said, "That is everything we can do tonight. Monday, we file. Are you all right?" I said no, but I will be. She said, "Do you want me to stay?" I said, "No, but I will be." She said, "Do you want me to stay?" I said, "No. Go home. Get some sleep. I will see you Monday." She left. I sat alone at the table by the window with the closed binder in front of me. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about how, when Royston was 9, I had taken him to the Akron warehouse and let him drive a forklift very slowly on a Saturday morning when no one was there. He had laughed so hard he had hiccuped. I thought about Eleanor making him grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles because he refused to eat them as squares. I thought about reading to him from a book about the moon landings until he fell asleep with his head against my arm. I thought about all of the love I had poured into the boy who had stood beside his bride tonight and told me I was selfish for not handing over the home where his mother had died. I cried a little. I am not ashamed to say it. I cried quietly into a cloth napkin at a wedding reception, surrounded by strangers, mourning a son who had been alive an hour ago and was now, in some essential way, gone. Then I dried my eyes. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I walked across the ballroom, past the dancers, past the cake, past the photographer trying to herd people into a group photo, and I stopped in front of my son and his bride. The DJ was playing something slow. They were swaying together near the dance floor. I tapped Royston on the shoulder. I said, "Son, I would like a word." Adeline started to follow. I said, "No, sweetheart. Just him. Just for a moment." Royston followed me to the corner of the ballroom. He looked annoyed. He looked tired. He looked more than anything like he wanted to get back to his wife. I said, "Royston, I want you to listen to me very carefully because I am only going to say this once. As of this moment, the apartment in the West Village will not be available to you after the lease ends in 6 weeks. The car you drove here tonight will be collected from your garage on Monday. Your credit cards have been canceled. Your trust distributions have been suspended, pending review. Your employment at Aldrich's Logistics will be terminated on Monday morning. The wedding vendors who have not yet been paid will be billing you and Adeline directly. Adeline's parents will need to check out of the plaza tomorrow morning. The joint account has been closed." He was staring at me. His mouth was open slightly. He was not understanding yet. I said, "Royston, I will not see you again. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Not at Christmas. Not if you call. Not if you write. The locks on the Park Avenue apartment are being changed in the morning. If you come there, you will not be admitted. If you call my phone, I will not answer. If you write me a letter, I will not open it. You have a wife now. She is your family. You'll need to build your life with her, on your own, the way every other adult in this country has to. He said, Dad, 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 what are you doing? Dad, you cannot. I said, I can. I said, I can. I just did. The papers will be filed Monday morning. He said, Dad. She did not mean it. She is stressed. The wedding. Her parents. There has been so much pressure. Dad, please. Please, we can talk about this. I will talk to her. She will apologize. Dad, please. He was crying. I want to be honest with you. He was crying real tears. There was a part of me, an old part, the part that had read him books about astronauts, that wanted to put my hand on his face and tell him it was going to be all right. That part of me almost won. But then I thought about Eleanor's photograph on the empty chair. I thought about her clothes in the closet. I thought about Adeline's open hand. I thought about my son saying, "Why do you have to make everything difficult?" I said, Royston, I am sorry. Your mother and I loved you very much. I walked out of the ballroom. I did not look back. I crossed the lobby. I asked the valet to bring my car around. I sat on a bench by the door while I waited, and I watched the snow start to fall. The first real snow of the season. When the car came, I tipped the valet $100 because he had been kind to me earlier, and I drove home to the Park Avenue apartment alone. The next 4 months were the hardest months of my life since Eleanor died. Royston tried everything. He came to the building. The doorman turned him away. He called my phone 43 times in the first week. I did not answer. He sent letters. I returned them unopened. He went to Marguerite's office and demanded to see her. She had him escorted out by the security guard. He wrote me a long email which my assistant printed and shredded without showing me. Adeline got involved. She called me crying. She left voicemails that were apologies followed by demands. She left voicemails that were apologies followed by demands. She left voicemails that were demands followed by threats. She left one voicemail in which she said she was pregnant, which I learned 6 weeks later was not true. Her parents threatened to sue me for the cost of the wedding. Marguerite responded with a single letter that ended that conversation. 3 things happened in the following months that you should know about. The first thing, Royston and Adeline separated 4 months after the wedding. He moved into a studio in Queens. She moved back in with her parents on Long Island. The marriage was annulled before the year was out, from what I heard later through Eleanor's brother who still occasionally talked to Royston. The moment the money was gone, the love went with it. She did not call him for 9 days after the wedding because she was figuring out, I think, whether he was worth the trouble without my checkbook attached. He called me once during that period, sober, late at night, and left a voicemail that I did listen to. He said, "Dad, I think I have made a terrible mistake. I think I have made the worst mistake of my life. Please call me back." I did not call him back. I am still not sure if that was right. The second thing, I sold the Park Avenue apartment. I had thought when this all started that I would die there. I changed my mind. There were too many ghosts. I bought a small house in Charleston near the water, with a porch and a garden and a guest room I will probably never use. I packed Eleanor's things myself, slowly, over 6 weeks, and gave most of them to a women's shelter she had volunteered at for 15 years. I kept her wedding ring, 3 of her sweaters, and the cookbook she had written notes in for 30 years. I keep the cookbook she had written notes in for 30 years. I keep the cookbook on the kitchen counter. I read her notes sometimes when I am cooking. The third thing. 8 months after the wedding, I got a letter from a woman named Coralind Whitaker Stenmark. She lived in Cleveland. She had been Eleanor's college roommate 50 years ago, and they had stayed close until Eleanor's death. I had met her perhaps 4 times. The letter was long. She had heard through the family grapevine what had happened. She wanted to tell me she was proud of me. She wanted to tell me that Eleanor, in their last phone call, 3 weeks before she died, had been worried about Royston, worried that he was getting selfish, worried that he was going to break my heart someday. She had told Courland, if Sterling has to choose between his dignity and our son, I want him to choose his dignity. He has always given too much. I read that letter on my porch in Charleston in the late afternoon sun. I read it 3 times. Then I put it down and I cried for an hour. And I felt Eleanor's hand on the back of my neck the way she used to put it there when I was struggling with something at work. And I felt her say, "My love, you did the right thing. You did the only thing. I am 72 now. I live alone, but I am not lonely. I have a small group of friends in Charleston, mostly other widowers and one divorcee named Henrietta, who I take to dinner on Thursdays. I have a dog named Custis. I read a great deal. I volunteer at the literacy program at the public library on Tuesdays. I have not seen Royston in 4 years. He sends a Christmas card every year. I keep them in a drawer, unopened. Maybe someday I will open them. Maybe someday I will open them. Maybe someday he will write a letter that I read. Maybe someday I will meet him for coffee in some neutral city, and we will sit across from each other as 2 strangers who used to know each other very well, and we will see if there is anything left to build on. I do not know. What I know is this: I raised a boy who became a man who watched his wife strike his father at his wedding, and called his father selfish for not handing over his home. Whatever I did wrong as a father, I did right that night, and I will not apologize for it. Not to him, not to her, not to any of the strangers who heard the slap and said nothing. I only wish Eleanor had been there to see Marguerite walk into that ballroom in her pajamas with the binder under her arm. She would have laughed. God, she would have laughed. She would have squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Sterling, that is the most expensive pair of pajamas I have ever seen." And I would have squeezed her hand back, and we would have moved on. I've spent a lot of quiet evenings on my Charleston porch, thinking about how a boy who once cried over a goldfish became a man who watched his wife strike his father and called the father selfish. I do not believe any single moment made him that way. I believe it was 1,000 small moments, most of them mine. Every time I said yes when I should have said not yet. Every check I wrote when I should have asked him to earn it. Every problem I solved that should have been his to solve. I gave him a soft life, and I told myself I was being a good father, and the truth is, I was being a comfortable one. That is the cause. The slap was the effect. Adeline did not invent her contempt for me out of nowhere. She learned it by watching how easily my son took everything I gave him. People only respect what they have seen another person work for. Royston had never seen me say no to him, so it never occurred to either of them that no was a word I owned. I think often about the difference between kindness and weakness. For most of my life, I confused them. I thought a generous father was a loving father. I thought a patient father was a wise father. But generosity without discernment is not love. It is fear dressed up as love. I was afraid Royston would not need me if I stopped paying for his life. And so I paid. And in the end, he did not need me anyway. And I had purchased my own irrelevance 1 wire transfer at a time. What I would tell any father watching this is something I wish someone had told me at 40. Your job is not to make your son's life easy. Your job is to make your son capable. Those are 2 different jobs, and most of us pick the wrong one, because the wrong one feels like love in the moment. Real love sometimes looks like a closed wallet and an open hand. Real love sometimes sounds like the word no said gently and meant completely. I also believe this. A man's dignity is not a luxury he can afford to surrender for the sake of keeping the peace. The night Adeline struck me, I had a choice. I could have handed her the keys and kept my son. I've thought about that version of the story many times. In that version, I am still paying for everything, and Royston is still calling me selfish, and Eleanor's photograph is in a box in a closet because Adeline redecorated. In that version, I died a long, slow death of small surrenders, and no one who loved me would have recognized me at the end of it. I chose the harder road. It cost me my son, at least for now. It also gave me back myself. At 68, I learned something I should have learned at 30. You cannot raise good people by giving them everything. You raise them by letting them carry what is theirs to carry and by being strong enough when the time comes to let them go.